Hello and welcome. We are going to allow individuals to join, so we will start in the next few seconds. Hi, yes, we are just allowing attendees the opportunity to join, and we will start relatively shortly. Okay, great. So it seems as though attendees are trickling in. So, oh, give me 1 second.
All right, thank you and good morning. Welcome to the Safer Identifying at Risk webinar. Uh, my name is Itza Beta, and I will be moderating today's event. I'm with the Office of Public Participation, and I want to thank you for joining us today for the State Water Resources Control Board Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience, better known as SAFER, program programs identifying at-risk public water systems, selecting risk indicators part 3 webinar, hosted by Department of Drinking Water and moderated by the Office of Public Participation. This webinar is being held 100% virtually and is also being webcast publicly in English. We are also recording today's event and will make sure it is accessible for our attendees and anyone who may not have been able to join us today. So here on the current slide is the Water Board mission collectively. We achieve our mission through an array of programs established within our divisions and regions. And as it is the Water Board's mission to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations, we want to begin this meeting by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. We also want to thank each person who continues to do their part to fight the fires that were raging in our state and hold those who are affected by the fires and are struggling with poor air quality in strength and solidarity. As a reminder, our work here today should strengthen the empowerment of Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water to all Californians. Next, we're going to look over the what is SAFER, and I wanted to take a minute to provide an overview of the Safer Drinking Water Program. SAFER stands for Safe, Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience, and the SAFER program's overarching goal is to provide safe and affordable drinking water in every California community for every Californian. The SAFER program, a term coined after the passing of Senate Bill 200 last year in July, formalizes work which the Water Boards has already been doing for a long time. The creation of the new Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund with 130 million per year for 10 years towards drinking water projects, primarily in small disadvantaged communities, was intended to fill funding gaps in that pre-existing program. At the water boards, the SAFER program is primarily implemented by the division, by and through the Division of Drinking Water, the Division of Financial Assistance, and the Office of Public Participation. So we work with drinking water systems through DDW, funding short and long term solutions through DFA, and engage with community served by those systems along the way through our Office of Public Participation, or OPP. The SAFER Advisory Group, with 19 members representing various parts of the stakeholder community, was formed late last year to bring their local expertise to the table to advise on the program specifically for each annual fund expenditure plan. And next, we're going to go over the presentation outline. So Next, what we're going to cover today, we'll be hearing from Kristen Abhold from the Division of Drinking Water's Needs Analysis Unit. She will cover the following with opportunities for feedback at the end of our presentation and with various polls and discussion questions. So what we will be discussing today is an introduction to DDW's Needs Analysis Unit, an overview of the needs assessment, the Risk Assessment 2.0 development, and as well as the timeline. So before we begin, let's talk about the meeting participation guidelines. So we want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us virtually. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we quickly move to a 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adopt the current public health concerns. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. So we don't expect delays, but we do ask for your patience should any difficulties arise. Some guidelines for our meeting today are that during the meeting, attendees will actually be able to submit questions through the Zoom Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. These questions will be read by the host and answered by our panelists today. Also, if you find that someone else might have entered a question that you would also like answered, you can actually upvote the question by giving the question a thumbs up, and then they are organized by the number of votes. We will have poll questions, discussion topics, and opportunities to ask questions, provide comment, and you can submit questions, comments, or answer the polls and discussions by going to our Microsoft form. So we have created a form that is a result of feedback that has been received in previous webinars, and it is an attempt to collect as much information as possible. We will have the link for that form up relatively shortly when the poll questions or the discussions arise, or if you'd like to ask any question in general. But we also will be providing an open Q&A period. So if at the end of today's presentation you'd like to speak, please remember to raise your virtual hand. This will help us locate you in the attendee list. If called upon, you will then be asked to unmute yourself. I do understand that some individuals and attendees will need to join us by phone. So as a reminder, if you are calling into today's event and you would like to raise your hand, you can do that by pressing *9 on your telephone keypad. Once called upon, you will be asked to press *6, which then unmutes yourself. And once you've finished asking your question or providing your comment, you can press *9 once more, which will then lower your hand. And then in addition, this event is being live webcasted on the Cali PA website. If you are watching this webinar through the webcast only and would like to ask a question or share a comment, you also have the opportunity to do so by sending an email to the safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have someone monitoring the email, and we'll try our best to ensure that your question is answered or that your comment is heard. Okay, so for today's event, we have many State Water Board team members assisting and supporting behind the scenes to ensure that everything runs smoothly and that we have as few participation bumps as possible. They are here to support at all levels, and I want to take time to acknowledge their work and dedication, so I thank you. And now I would like to introduce Kristen, your host for this morning's webinar. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Itze, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to share with you an update on where we are with our risk assessment development. But before I begin, I really want to get a sense of who's with us today. I'm going to launch some poll questions. So this one, pretty basic. Let's launch the poll. Did you participate or review the April 17th or the July 22nd webinar on our risk assessment for public water systems? And we're asking this question because this is a webinar that's part of a series of webinars, and I want to know how much information you guys are aware of already, so I don't linger too much on background that you may be familiar with. So I'll give you all just another minute or so. And for those of you who are participating through the Cal EPA webcast, I encourage you to participate in our poll questions and our discussion questions as well. You'll see that bit.ly hyperlink on the slide there. If you copy that down and go to our website, you'll find a web form where you can respond to the poll questions and write comments or questions there. So we really encourage you to participate if you can. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results. It looks like a majority of folks have been able to participate in one of our previous webinars, but we still have a few folks who are new. So thank you for those who are joining us for the first time. I am going to provide some background information, which hopefully will provide more context. And for those of you who are joining us again, thank you for your continued participation in this effort. And then we have one more poll question to get us started. Have you read our white paper, the evaluation of potential indicators and recommendations for risk assessment 2.0 for public water systems? We've posted it on our website. We shared the hyperlinks via email if you'd registered for the event. It's okay if you haven't read it. We're going to be diving into some of the results of our evaluation and what was summarized in our white paper. And we have 4 supplemental appendices that go with that white paper that really detail our analysis. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds. Okay. Again, it looks like a majority of folks were able to at least open the document, read through it, skim through it. So that's fantastic to hear. A few folks haven't had the opportunity to do that. So definitely appreciate, again, you guys hopping on the webinar. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on what we have in that white paper. We've got more polling questions to come, and we do have a number of discussion topics where you'll be able to raise your hand and participate in the conversation. That will take a little bit, will be a little bit later in the presentation, but not at the very end. So we will have opportunities to discuss throughout. And again, I just want to remind people, there is that hyperlink at the very bottom of this slide here, that bit.ly link. Please, if you are watching the Cal EPA webcast, please go there if you would like to participate in any of the poll questions or if you'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the needs assessment before I dive in and give you an update on where we are with our risk assessment, just to provide some context. So like Itzi said, Senate Bill 200, which was passed in 2019, created the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, which provides up to $130 million per year through 2030. If you read the language of the bill, you'll see that every year, the Division of Financial Assistance, the Water Board, has to develop an annual fund expenditure plan, which helps us determine how we prioritize projects and fundings within for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. SB 200 says that the prioritization of projects for funding needs to be drawn from the analysis of our needs assessment. So what is the needs assessment? The needs assessment has 3 core components. It has an affordability assessment, a risk assessment, and a cost estimate for long-term and interim solutions. The affordability assessment is going to be conducted for all public water systems, and you may have heard me talk about it on previous webinars or events. And we will be coming out with more information on that soon. We have our risk assessment, and our risk assessment is conducted for public water systems, tribal systems, state small water systems, and domestic wells. And then our cost estimate, I'm just going to go on the next slide. Our cost estimate, I'm a bit of a visual person, so hopefully this helps some of you. Our cost estimate looks at all of our at-risk systems that we've identified and all of our systems that are currently on the human right to water list now, those that we consider failing. And we say, well, what's the price tag for helping bring solutions to these communities? And it helps give us a sense of how big the gap might be in the funding that we have available to support the SAFER program. For our risk assessment, what I'm really going to be talking about today is our risk assessment for public water systems. We are working with others to develop methodologies for conducting a risk assessment for those tribal water systems, our state smalls, and domestic wells. But just to, again, bring it back into context, the whole purpose of the risk assessment and the affordability assessment is really to help us prioritize where funding and technical assistance should be targeted. And, we recognize that, the need out there is most likely going to be larger than what we have funding to support. And so we want to have a transparent way for prioritizing systems and communities that are going to be receiving assistance. So you'll see at the very top of the pyramid here that those systems that are considered out of compliance or failing, our human right to water systems are the top priority, followed by those at-risk systems and domestic wells, and then potentially at-risk systems, and then those that are not at risk. Like Itse mentioned at the beginning, the SAFER program is really being implemented by a ton of different people within the Water Board across multiple divisions. We have the Division of Financial Assistance, which is responsible for the annual fund expenditure plan and executing funding for the SAFER program. We have the Division of Drinking Water, where my unit is located, where we conduct the annual needs assessment. We help with data collection and analysis. And we have a Northern and Southern Engagement Unit, which works with communities and systems across the state to help them connect with our resources within the SAFER program. We have the Division of Water Quality, which my unit works very closely with. They are developing a methodology for determining our at-risk state smalls and domestic wells. You may have seen some of their webinars and material that's been shared recently. And then we have our Office of Public Participation, who's been fantastic. They're helping us host this webinar today, but they also help with public engagement, meeting facilitation. They work with our engagement units in communities. But that's just within the State Water Board. I really want to take opportunity to recognize and thank all of the amazing folks that we've been working with outside of our agency. We have a ton of collaboration partners. You heard us mention the SAFER Advisory Group earlier. We've also been working closely with the Department of Water Resources, with OWEHA. We work with UCLA. We have a contract with UCLA and a bunch of subcontractors where they are helping us develop the initial methodologies for our risk assessment and our cost estimate work. So again, we are working with a lot of different people, and we really think that all of these different perspectives and expertise are really helping the SAFER program develop into something, I think, quite special. So how does this all fit together? Just to help, again, frame things. The needs assessment results help inform the Division of Financial Assistance's annual fund expenditure plan, which helps with that prioritization of funding and technical assistance for systems. And that prioritization also helps us target where our Division of Drinking Water Engagement Unit services are rendered. So let's dig in a little bit to the risk assessment. That's really what today's webinar is focused on. We've been working very closely with UCLA and all of our partners to develop our risk assessment methodology for public water systems. And at a high level, what exactly is a risk assessment methodology? It starts with risk indicators. These are quantifiable measurements of data that helps us look at what a system's risk might be in terms of not being compliant anymore with water quality standards. We also have thresholds for those indicators. So at what point, are you more at risk of failing? And then we use weights and scores to help us balance our risk indicators based on criticality and level of importance. Today's webinar, like our previous ones, really is focused on our risk indicators. but we are going to be hosting a webinar in December. Our next step really is to start digging into determining our thresholds and our weight and score so we can have a complete risk assessment methodology. These are our phases of development. We have completed phase 1 and 2, and we're excited to be moving finally into phase 3. But today, we're really going to look for your feedback, your input. We want to select risk indicators that make sense and can help us really identify those systems that are most at risk of failing. Moving forward after today, so starting right after this webinar, we're going to start moving towards determining thresholds, potentially tiered thresholds, and looking at different weighting and scoring approaches using historical data. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the very end of this presentation. Once we've developed our methodology, our goal is to complete that by the end of the year. We will then be conducting our risk assessment for inclusion in the 2021-22 Fund Expenditure Plan. So where did this begin? We did have risk assessment 1.0 indicators. These were developed originally with the UCLA contract that we have in place. We hosted a webinar in April, and the public feedback that we received was, this is a good start. These are good risk indicators, but, we want to look at maybe a broader set. We want to think about categories. So I'll talk a little bit about that just in a bit, but I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't seen the white paper or the webinar recording, we wanted to share those hyperlinks with you if you wanted to learn more. So from our previous webinar in April, and then again, July 22nd, we were able to identify actually 129 potential risk indicators. From feedback that we received from both of those webinars, we had a good set of potential indicators within our 4 buckets, or different risk indicator categories, if you will, which are water quality, accessibility, affordability, and technical and managerial financial capacity, also known as Tmf capacity. I want to highlight again, that we worked with quite a few stakeholders to develop our list of potential indicators. Again, 129 was quite a significant list. We definitely looked at the indicators that were developed by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the OWEHA Human Right to Water Risk Assessment and Data Tool. We looked at the Department of Water Resources, Drought and Water Shortage Risk Scoring Tool, and we also consulted with the California Public Utilities Commission looking at the affordability metrics that they developed. So what have we done since July 22nd, which is when we were really trying to finalize our risk of indicators? Well, we took all the public feedback that we received, both written and verbal. And again, if you're on the call and you provided feedback to us, thank you so much. We really appreciated it. And we got to a list of 129 risk indicators. We then used our evaluation tool to assess the applicability and data fitness of all 129 risk indicators. We identified duplicative indicators, and then we came out with a recommended list of what we think should be included in Risk Assessment 2.0. And I'm going to walk you through all of these. So this is my data funnel, if you will, and I'm hoping that this will help you walk through our process, and hopefully it makes sense. If not, please let us know. But we started off with 129 identified potential risk indicators, and that's a lot. I don't think we would want to have a risk assessment that has that many risk indicators in it. So we wanted to have a transparent process for how we were going to start narrowing down this list to something that was more manageable and a list that we could actually pick and choose from. So the first step was to use our evaluation tool to assess these risk indicators, to start narrowing this list down. And our risk indicator evaluation tool was introduced in our last webinar, and it's a 3-step process. The first step was looking at risk indicator applicability. This is, how critical is this indicator to a water system's ability to stay in compliance, to not fail? And you'll see, I'll walk you through the criteria, so you'll see what the actual scoring was. The second step was then looking at data fitness. So each indicator could be made up of one or multiple data points. We needed to look at the data that supported each indicator to make sure that we had good data coverage, Because if we only had data for maybe 30% of the water systems we were going to be evaluating, that wouldn't really be an equitable assessment. So we needed to have data coverage. Data availability, we needed to make sure that the data was available to us in a machine readable format, that it's available on a rolling basis. If it's a metric that needs to be updated regularly, we need to make sure the data was available to us regularly. If it was a data set that was created, one time a few years ago, it's not going to be up to date, 10 years from now when we're doing our risk assessment. So we need to take that into consideration. And then the last piece is data accuracy and quality. We wanted to see, is the data that we may have on hand, is it actually reflective of what it's meant to measure? And you could have data accuracy and quality issues for a number of reasons. It could be, the database that's collecting this information doesn't have any quality assurances, it's not being validated, or the way that you're asking for data to be inputted may be confusing to the person providing it, which could lead to other errors. And then step 3 looks at the results of step 1 and 2 together, and we have a combined evaluation that said whether or not we should be considering this risk indicator for our assessment. So let's dig into the results. We had, I think, about 10 people across my unit and UCLA working on doing this evaluation, and we relied on input from quite a few people to help us do this work. So step 1, our evaluation results. We had criteria for applicability that was qualitative rather than quantitative. You can see we have excellent, good, fair, and poor as our scores. Excellent meant that it was an evidence-driven factor that led to an excellent score. Good means most people within the water sector agreed that there was applicability here. Fair is where there may be some debate. And poor said, there's really no evidence and no one in the water sector really agrees that this is a good indicator. We relied again on public feedback and external recommendations on how to assign our applicability scores. But really what we relied the most on was we had a survey of 60 engineers within the State Water Board, and they helped us determine applicability for each of our indicators. We put out that survey. They very graciously spent the time of answering whether or not applicability applied here. And you'll see that we had 8 indicators that were excellent, 86 that were good, and then 30 that were fair and 5 that were poor. For data coverage, again, this is really important for us. We had a quantitative criteria for this, where good, you needed to have 90% coverage or more, fair was 65 to 90%, and poor was below 65. And you'll see that, most indicators scored good. We had 63. Fair was 28 indicators, and poor was 38. Data availability, again, we had most indicators scored fairly well. We had good, 73 for good, 23 for fair, and 33 for poor. Again, this is one of those criteria where we had a quantitative threshold, which was really important to us. Data accuracy and quality. For this one, similar to the applicability scoring, we needed to rely on qualitative criteria. We did not have the time to do data quality audits for all of the different data points needed for all 129 risk indicators. And so that same survey I mentioned before, we asked the district or the engineers within our district offices and the State Water Board to weigh in on the data accuracy and quality for the data points that were coming from State Water Board data sets. And we used that analysis along with our own to apply the good, fair, or poor criteria scores to our risk indicators. You'll see 44 scored good, 58 fair, and 27 poor. And then our combined evaluation looked at the results again from step 1 and step 2. And you'll see here, step 1 needed to be excellent or good for applicability. Step 2 needed to be good for all 3. It was a solid yes. This is a risk indicator you should be considering for risk assessment 2.0. For maybe, step 1 results must be good, and step 2 results may be good or fair for all 3 criteria. And for those of you who participated in our last webinar and read our white paper, you'll see that this criteria was modified slightly based on stakeholder feedback to make it a little bit more stringent. We kept it at step 1 must be good before we had good and fair. So this made it a little bit of a higher bar to reach to be in the yes or to be in the maybe category. No is step 1 results for fair or poor, and step 2 results for fair or poor for all 3 criteria. And I really want to point out future. This future category is where most people recognize that it was a good risk indicator. Applicability was solid. However, we had some serious data fitness issues where the risk indicator was scoring fair or poor there. For those that have a step 3 future evaluation, those are ones that we're going to want to take a closer look at as we move forward over the next few years to see if we can improve our data collection, help with data quality issues that may arise, to see if this may be an indicator we can use in the future for future versions of our risk assessment. And this is the combined evaluation results. So you'll see for risk assessment 2.0, if an indicator scored no or future, it was not considered for our risk assessment we'll be conducting, in January. But for the yeses and maybes, these were the batches of risk indicators that we wanted to take a closer look at. And you'll see that we had 51 risk indicators that scored maybe and yes across our 3 categories. I know this is a lot of hyperlinks, and I apologize. I just wanted to make sure you guys had access to all of the white papers that we put out for this evaluation. The top one is our main white paper, which summarizes the results of our evaluation. And then we have 4 supplemental appendices, which has detailed write-ups for every single risk indicator with explanations for why they scored the way they did for each of our criteria for step 1 and 2. So if you have any questions about why a particular indicator was or was not considered, or why it scored a certain way, I really encourage you to take a look at those supplemental appendices. I will say I received some feedback yesterday that folks who were clicking on these hyperlinks were having trouble navigating to those pages, but if you copy and paste the URL into your browser, it should work. If you continue to struggle to access the white papers, please email us and we'll make sure that you get a copy. Okay, I'm going to launch another poll question. Get to launch poll. Do these evaluation results align with what you expected? We looked at 129 risk indicators, a lot of fantastic suggestions from everybody. Give you about 10 more seconds to respond. And again, for those of you on the webcast version of this webinar, I please encourage you to head over to that bit.ly link, which is a Google form where you can participate in the surveys and submit questions or comments. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. All right, we have 23% said that you expected these results, but the majority of folks, 58%, said maybe. They haven't had a chance to review the evaluations yet, which makes sense that they are lengthy documents. Some folks said, we have 18% that said maybe. There are some potential risk indicator evaluations I don't agree with. We definitely want to hear from you. If our evaluations don't make sense to you, please let us know. Nothing is final yet. And then we have 3% say, no, I disagree with the majority of the potential risk indicator evaluations and the results do not align with my expectations. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback that you can give us, what doesn't make sense or where you would evaluate things differently, please reach out to us. I'll stop sharing. Okay. So based on our evaluation, we were able to narrow our list down from 129 potential risk indicators to 51 potential risk indicators. But that's still a big list of potential indicators. I don't think we didn't want to have that many in our risk assessment. And a number of folks pointed out on our last webinar and through the public feedback period, that there are a lot of indicators that were somewhat or wholly duplicative of each other. Now that was intentional because some of them have different methodologies and different data sets that they rely on. But we wanted to take a closer look and help narrow down our list even further by recognizing where those duplicates were. So that's what we did. So we created some subcategories within our 4 risk indicator categories to help us with identifying duplicates. Again, looking at where they kind of were moderately duplicative with other risk indicators, where they kind of measuring similar things. And the results were we found 27 or about 53% of those 51 indicators were somewhat or wholly duplicative. So if you were to avoid duplicative risk indicators, you would get to about 36 indicators that you could actually consider for the assessment. And we detail this in the white paper. This is on table 3 on page 16. And this, I wanted to put this table up here so if there was any confusion on how to read these tables. This is an example of the accessibility indicators. You'll see the indicators underneath their subcategories. And if the duplicative column on the right-hand side, if they have the same letter, it means that we found them to be fairly duplicative or measuring something fairly similar. So you can see here, number of sources and single groundwater source are pretty similar. And then presence of intertides and emergency intertides, again, pretty similar in terms of what they're measuring here. And the two under them, projected sea level, risk, and water source types, we considered unique and we didn't see any other duplicative indicators there. So you'll see, if we were choosing from this list, we would only want to select 1A, 1B, and anything else that's unique. And that's how we were able to identify that smaller list of 36 potential risk indicators that we would want to select. So we're almost there. So this is as far as we could get in terms of limiting our pool of potential risk indicators. And the next step really was to make our recommendation. This is a starting point for conversation. We wanted to put this out to the public to get feedback and see what you think about our recommended list. When we were choosing our recommended risk indicators, there were a few kind of guiding principles, if you will, that were helping our selection. We really wanted to limit the number of risk indicators to a reasonable number in order to simplify the analytical burden while still providing a full picture of risk for our risk assessment. I think once you have, if you have a big set of risk indicators that you're looking at, it kind of creates a much more complicated assessment, and it can be hard or difficult for people to understand what it is you're measuring at that point. So we wanted to, again, to keep it to a reasonable number. We wanted to ensure diversity of risk indicator types. You see that we have those 4 categories of water quality, accessibility, affordability, and technical and managerial and financial capacity. We didn't want everything to be just in one category or just in 2 categories. We wanted to make sure we had a diversity of indicators across all 4 of those categories. Of course, we want to avoid duplicative risk indicators, and just showed you how we were able to do that. And then the last piece, we wanted to identify the appropriate balance between risk indicators that may be influenced by water system management and risk indicators that are completely outside of a water system sphere of influence. If we had a risk assessment that had indicators that were a majority of metrics that water systems could not influence in any capacity, it would be difficult to get them off of the the risk list. And I don't think it would be fair to many systems or communities to permanently label them at risk without being able to make changes to not be at risk anymore. So trying to find a good balance there was important to us. Okay, well, let's get into our recommendations. And you'll see at the top of the next 4 slides where you can find more information about these indicators in the white paper. So our recommended water quality risk indicators is an E. coli presence, increasing presence of water quality trends towards MCL, treatment technique violations, past presence on the human right to water list. So this means systems that have previously been out of compliance, maximum duration of high potential exposure, and percentage of sources exceeding an MCL. And again, you can learn more about these in our white paper, and you can read about their scoring and evaluation in the appendices. For accessibility, our risk indicators are number of sources, presence of inner ties, water source type, the results of the drought and water shortage risk assessment that's conducted by the Department of Water Resources, and if you're located in a critically overdrafted groundwater basin. Affordability. This one gets a little complicated, so bear with me as I walk you through this. For affordability, the State Water Board has historically used this first risk indicator, which is percent of median household income for determining the affordability burden on communities. We've used it for affordability assessment for the past fund expenditure plan, and it's been used by DSA and others for determining disadvantaged communities. We've identified underneath this first indicator a number of additional indicators that we would like to use as affordability risk indicators. However, we have to determine thresholds for these indicators, and it's important that we develop those thresholds through a stakeholder-driven process. And so we are proposing that the ones in the green text that use the 2022-23 date, that we would be postponing use of these indicators until the next fund expenditure plan, so that we have enough time to work with stakeholders to develop defensible thresholds for these indicators. So I'm going to walk you through these. The household burden indicator for drinking water is an indicator that was recommended by water associations. It's going to be on our rates dashboard. If you haven't seen it yet, we're going to be, if you haven't heard about it yet, we're going to be demoing it on October 30th, and we're very excited about that. There's a poverty prevalence indicator. There's a housing burden indicator, which we think, especially for California, is especially important for us to be looking at housing burden in addition to the burden of rates. Extreme water bill, and percent shutoff. Again, I really encourage everyone to take a look at our white paper, which has definitions for all of these, and to take a look at the appendices that has the methodology for how you develop them. Tmf capacity. Now, I'm going to tell you, Tmf capacity, if you take a look at our summary table in our white paper and the appendice that dives in deeper, you'll see that we really struggled with our TMF capacity risk indicators. For a lot of them, we weren't collecting the data. And if we did, it was, we didn't have good coverage. It wasn't available to us. And so we were very limited in the TMF capacity indicators that we could choose from. But we are, I think, very satisfied with this list here. We've got number of service connections, operator certification violations, monitoring and reporting violations, significant deficiencies, and extensive treatment installed. And so this list of indicators is 22, and that is the final step that we've done in our funnel. Thank you for your patience as I've walked you through this. But we are looking for feedback. I'm going to launch another poll. And again, for those who are on the webcast, I really encourage you to go to the bit.ly link and let us know what you think. You can fill out these poll questions there too. Do you support this list of recommended indicators for risk assessment 2.0? We have yes, I support this list. Maybe there are some risk indicator recommendations I don't agree with. No, I don't support the majority of risk indicators. And I need more time to review before I provide feedback. Okay. So it looks like 28% say, yes, I support this list. 20% say maybe there are some risk indicator recommendations I don't agree with. Only 1%, 3% says, no, I don't support the majority of the recommended indicators. But the majority of you say, I need more time, which is totally understandable. Again, we are looking for feedback. This is not the only opportunity to provide it. You can email us after this webinar, and you can also, the web form that I keep pointing to, that bit.ly link, that's going to remain open for the entire comment period, feedback period, where you can go in and you can respond to these poll questions and provide more feedback after you've had more time to review the white paper. Something I really wanted to take the time to highlight is that you may have noticed that we have some risk indicators in our recommended list that are associated with non-MCL violations, such as our treatment technique violations, operator certification violations, monitoring and reporting violations. We think that there further consideration should be given to define what it means for a system to be consistently failing or to be at risk. You know, when you're looking at a system that has violations that are non-MCL related, you know, should that be considered failing? Because right now, our current human right to water list, failing is for violating MCL standards. So this may lead to an expanded methodology for how the water systems are classified or prioritized within the SAFER program. We want to engage with stakeholders to think through this a little bit more. But in case anyone was wondering when they're looking at our list, we are trying to think through how violations are considered, both for our at-risk assessment and for how we look at systems that are failing. But we wanted to have a conversation with you a little bit about that and see, you know, if you have some thoughts about how the State Water Board should be defining failing. And I'm going to turn it over to Itse, who's going to help us moderate.
Thank you so much, Kristen. All right, so we do have this discussion topic, which asks, what is failure? How should the State Water Board define failing? So if, as I mentioned earlier, you do have the opportunity to answer this discussion question via email at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. There is the Q&A function at the bottom. I have seen that there are 3 questions that have been submitted. And then if you'd like the opportunity to speak and provide your comment out loud, you can actually raise your hand on the webinar function, and we can then find you in the attendee list and unmute you. If you are calling in, you would need to press *9 to raise your hand, and then you would need to press *6 once called upon. So Kristen, I do see that we have 2 hands raised in the attendee list. I'm going to go ahead and now there's 3. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Jessica Mullane to speak. Hi, Jessica, you should be able to unmute yourself. Let's give a few seconds. It can take a minute to locate the unmute button. Give me one more moment. Let me just locate Jessica. Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot, we cannot hear you, Jessica. So I do see we have Drew Lester who has his hand raised. So Drew, I'm going to ask that you unmute yourself. Okay. Um, Give me 1 second. Drew just typed, oh, okay. Drew indicated, sorry, I think that was a mistake. So, okay. Well, it does not, give me one more moment. Cindy Tuck, let's see if this works. So I'm going to ask that you unmute yourself.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Hi, good morning. Yes.
Great. Just a quick note that, when I think you go back to what the statute says, and for failure and consistently failing is in reference to compliance with the standards, the MCLs. So, and then the at risk gets into situations where a system may be, on the edge of failing to meet the standards. So you have that at risk category to cover other situations, but we've always read the failure part to reference compliance with the standards. And the consistently part was in there because if a system had had one violation and it, that had been corrected, it's no longer a problem. The focus was on where are there chronic violations of the standards, so a system, has failed to comply.
Thank you so much, Cindy.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Cindy.
All right. Currently, I do not see any other hands raised in the attendee list. Kristen, do you want to go ahead and move to the Q&A box, or would you like to go ahead and move on to the poll question?
Let's go to the Q&A box.
All right. So in the Q&A, we do have a question that asks, where does OECA fit into the organization of SAFER presented in the beginning of the workshop? So this isn't related to your current discussion question. So I'm not sure if you want to hold off or if you'd like to answer now.
I think let's hold off for some of those broader questions till the end of the presentation.
Perfect. And I see that there are no other questions in the Q&A that pertain to this specific discussion topic. So I'd just like to remind those that are in attendance that the form that we have provided for you also in the chat box will remain open until the 30th, and you will have the opportunity to answer this question more thoroughly and with a lot more time. So I don't see any more hands raised, and give me one moment. Give me one moment. Madeline, okay, let's see. Okay, well, I currently do not identify any other attendee that has their hand raised and would like to speak.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on, and I do want to hear from folks if they have comments or questions around our indicators. We will have time for that discussion at the end of the presentation. So what are our immediate next steps after this? Again, it seems like most of you who are participating through our Zoom link would like some more time to read through our recommended risk indicators and our evaluations to provide feedback, which we definitely appreciate. And you can submit feedback through our safer@waterboards.ca.gov email address using the email title Public Water Systems Risk Assessment. You can also use that bit.ly form that we've been pointing to throughout this webinar as a way to submit public feedback as well. Next, we're going to be conducting phases 3 and 4 of our risk assessment methodology development, looking at thresholds, weighting, and scoring, and then hosting a webinar on December 14th to share our results. So I want to talk a little bit about steps 3 and 4, phases 3 and 4 of development. What exactly do we mean by thresholds and weighting and scores? And so hopefully some of these infographics will help explain things. If not, please let me know. I definitely want to hopefully frame things that make sense for folks. So one thing that we're thinking about is tiered thresholds. And so what might this look like? I'm going to use a water quality risk indicator as an example. So you have not at risk systems, but at some threshold point, you have a system that's now potentially at risk. And then you may have a second threshold where you've moved from being potentially at risk to at risk. And for a water quality indicator like lead and copper, you can have our MCL, right? And maybe lead and copper is a bad example, nitrate, where you have an MCL. And if you're above that, you're automatically on the human right to water list, you're out of compliance, you are no longer part of our risk assessment because you are in that top tier of the pyramid from the beginning, if you recall. So how do we determine threshold? How do we distinguish different threshold types? So there may be some that are legislative or regulatory defined. There are others that may be supported by evidence-based studies. There are some thresholds that are commonly utilized by regulatory agencies. An example I like to point to is that 1.5% threshold for median household income that we use for affordability. And then we have recognized by sector experience, where most folks in the field who work in the sector would say, you wouldn't want to have more than, or you want to have at least, a couple 100 days of cash on hand, right, for emergencies, if we were talking about that type of indicator. And so how do we use weights? So we use thresholds to help us determine where you might be scoring with an individual indicator, but we're trying to determine, does one indicator use scoring, and the at-risk piece for one of the, if we have the 22 indicators, does that make you automatically at risk? Or should we be looking across all of the indicators and thinking about how you're scoring across all of those to determine whether or not you're at risk? And that's the approach we're leaning towards. And so then the question becomes, how do you weight indicators? Should they all be the same weight, or should they have different weights kind of based on criticality? And when we did our webinar back in April, feedback that we received from the public was that they kind of preferred different weights. But we want to hear from you. Again, always opportunities to weigh in on this, because some indicators may, again, be more critical than others. And then we also have the option of applying weight to the different categories that these indicators fall in. So we have our four category types of water quality, accessibility, affordability, and Tmf capacity. Do those all have the same weight, or again, should we be applying weights differently across those categories? So what might this look like in practice? Again, this is kind of your menu of options, if you will. This is just an illustration of what it may or could look like. So you could have, a bunch of our risk indicators with, you can see the different sizes here indicating that they have different weights associated with them. The colors indicating whether or not they're past our different tiered thresholds, that they're either at risk or potentially at risk or doing well for each of those different individual indicators. We can then group them together. So if we're looking at Tmf capacity, we can say, okay, well, for the ones that we're looking at here, you're maybe scoring in the yellow range. You're doing okay. You're not at risk for just Tmf capacity. And then we can do the same across all of the four categories. And then we have our combined assessment that looks across how you're doing in all four of those categories to determine whether or not you're at risk or potentially at risk. So this is one way we could do it. And we are looking at other options, and again, always open to feedback and suggestions from everybody. I'm going to ask, we've got 2 poll questions to see what your thoughts are. Let me launch the poll. 5. Do you support different weights for individual risk indicators? Yes, I support different weights. No, all risk indicators should have the same weight, or I need more time to think about it. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, share the results. It looks like the majority of you said, yes, I support different weights, and that does align with the feedback that we had received earlier, so that's great to hear. We had one person say no, all risk indicators should have the same weight, and then we had 30% say that I need more time to consider this question before I provide feedback, which is perfectly fine. So thank you. And then I'm going to move to the next one, which is very similar question, but asking about categories instead. Launch the poll. Do you support different weights for risk indicator categories? Yes, I support different weights. No, all risk indicators should have the same weight. And no, more time. I need more time. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, end the poll, share the results. And similar spread to the last one, 64% said, yes, I support different weights across the indicator categories. And then we had 30%, looks like no one said no. And then we had 36% say that they needed more time to consider questions. Does that make sense? Okay. Discussion topic, weights and scores. Do you have any recommendations on how the State Water Board should set weights and scores for individual risk indicators or risk indicator categories?
Perfect. And please remember that you do have the various options in which you can answer this discussion topic. I've gone ahead and included the instructions as to how you can raise your hand, and when your name is called upon, we can unmute yourself. So this would be the opportunity to do so. Madeline, I do see that your hand is raised. Give me one moment. I have now asked you to speak. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. This is an incredible amount of work, and I wanted to congratulate the staff on doing this and all of the outreach that you've done during this time. I wanted to talk about the fact that these risk indicators, different risk indicators, may point to potential water safety problems, water affordability problems, water supply problems, and they will vary tremendously by the circumstances of individual systems. So I'm not sure how you could actually weight all of them as standard weights without looking very closely into how these individual systems perform on the individual indicators. I can give you an example. A system is not getting any MCL violations, but they have incredibly poor technical capacity, and they need to flush their systems, and they don't know how to do it well, and they have dead-end pipes, which create a bacteria problem that doesn't get indicated in your database. They have really poor financial management. They not only don't have money on hand, but they may actually be in debt without actually disclosing that. So what happens is that with those things happening, the potential for water pollution problems is increased. If you don't know how to flush properly, bad water comes out through for the tap. If you switch water sources and they have different mineral contents, you could be scouring the tap and causing a lead problem, a flint problem. If you don't have adequate budget, or your rates aren't high enough to support the system, then you're not going to be doing the kind of maintenance. Even if you have the right kind of right level of service operator, you're not going to have the kind of maintenance and investment done. So I just wanted to point out that at some point you may end up having to weight these differently according to the specific factors at a specific site. And you may need to know something about what's going on at the specific site. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much. Kristen, did you want to add anything?
No, I thought that was useful. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Give me one moment. I don't see any other hands raised in the attendee list. A reminder, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can open your participation view. Under that, you would have the opportunity to raise your hand, and then we would ask to unmute.
Hello?
Let's see.
Yes. How are you?
Oh. All right. We do have some. We do have a question. It's in the Q&A. It says, it might be possible to combine water quality violations into violations of primary drinking water standards, which would include MCLs, treatment techniques, and monitoring and reporting violations. Probably wouldn't cover the operator certifications. Did you want to provide any comment on that specific submission?
Right. So, well, MCL violations right now are considered failing, and that's that top tier. So it's not part of our risk assessment. So it sounds like then the recommendation would be to look at the other violations combined. Is that the suggestion? Perhaps the commenter
Right.
can.
That's how it appears. Okay.
Something for us to think about.
Okay, great. And we have, these questions are saved and we will return back to them if you feel that, for attendees that feel that we have not accurately answered or provided significant answer, we will be saving these Q&A questions and then returning to them. I do have two questions here from Jonathan Rash, and it's just a question overall. Was the availability of tribal data, tribal water systems regulated by federal EPA factored into the decision process? And then to go along with that, for example, I doubt that any of the data for the affordability indicator is available for tribal systems.
Oh, absolutely agree. We know that we will need to modify our version of the risk assessment for tribal water systems. And we're currently working with OPP to reach out to tribal systems to get their input. So we don't anticipate that the exact methodology that we're developing here for public water systems would apply. We are working with EPA to see what data is available to us. But this is an ongoing effort within the State Water Board. So I appreciate the comment.
Thank you. We do have in the chat box, there's a submission. It indicates from Karen Morgan, another comment that relates to this topic, a lack of qualified operators or managerial staff to not only operate and fund the system, but be able to complete the risk assessment to its full potential. I believe that this is a suggestion.
Yes, we have operator certification violation as one of our Tmf capacity risk indicators. And, personally with my background, I'd love to see some more financial ones too. We're just very limited in the data that we have access to right now. So that's something we'd love to incorporate in the future if we can collect better data in that space.
Thank you, Kristen. I am going into see if there have been any submissions via the SAFER email box. So give me one moment. Let's see. It doesn't, there is a question. It's from Cedric Twilight, and it's multiple questions in one submission. So it does indicate, do you have a list of commenters that contributed to the SAFER white paper? I'd like to see the list of commenters, comments, and staff responses.
We don't have a list that's made public yet, but we can work internally to see if we can pull something together.
Great.
We did
Following,
in the white paper, just one moment.
go ahead.
In the white paper, we do have a summary of the feedback that we did receive both during the webinar and during the public comment period. So that's in one of our appendices in the main white paper. So I encourage them to take a look at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then just one moment. I apologize. For some reason, the VPN wants to kick me out right now in the center of this. Give me one moment. Okay. All right. Then a following question along with Cedric's first question, and I've noted your response, Kristen. Thank you. Where can we find the scores for public systems evaluated?
So we haven't conducted a risk assessment with the methodology that we're developing right now. There is a list of systems that were identified as at risk in the fund expenditure plan that was released more than a few months ago now, which can be found online through the SAFER website. But we do not have an evaluation of water systems yet. We hopefully will have that for the next fund expenditure plan, which will be released next year.
All right. Thank you.
And does Cindy have her hand up? It's real quick.
Oh, yes. Give me one moment. Let me double check that that's not someone who might have already spoken. Give me one moment. I cannot see the individual that does have their hand up. If my fellow water board staff that is supporting on the back end, if you can identify an individual that has their hand up, can you please ask?
She put her hand down. It's
okay. Perfect. My system is a little bit delayed, so I do apologize. But following the question of Cedric, it does indicate what happens if your public water system is at risk?
No, that's a great question. If your water system's at risk, it then it helps us, the State Water Board, with prioritizing funding and TA assistance. So when that system comes to the State Water Board seeking funding or financial assistance, the Division of Financial Assistance will see that that system is at risk, which will help determine eligibility for funding. It does not guarantee, I want to be clear, it does not guarantee funding or technical assistance, but it does put you higher on the prioritization list when compared to systems that are not at risk.
Perfect. Okay. And then what is the risk threshold score that initiates actions?
Well, we are trying to determine those thresholds. That's part of the next step of our methodology development, is what gets you onto that at-risk list. Where are those thresholds? Are they at the individual risk indicator level? Are they within the categories or a combined assessment across all of the indicators? That's what we're trying to develop between now and December.
Nice. Thank you, Kristen. And then the last related question for Cedric, what would be the timelines for necessary actions? Is this something that will also be determined coming up next with the methodology development?
No. So our at-risk list does not trigger any action. We hope that if a water system sees that they're at risk and for particular indicators, that they will then seek assistance or hopefully make some changes to how businesses run to hopefully get themselves off the at-risk list. But again, there's no trigger point that the water board is going to come in and do something to that system. That's not what the purpose of this assessment is for.
Perfect. We do have a submission that relates to slide 40. It asks, please give an example of an indicator of risk that is completely outside the water system's ability to address per slide 40?
Oh, fantastic question. There was a number of indicators in the accessibility category, ones around like climate risk or potentially even fire risk, depending on how you were looking at it. Those, anything climate change related, right? It would be difficult for the water system to do anything about a temperature shift. Temperature shift was actually one of the indicators that we looked at. It's a DWR indicator. Others would be community level economic conditions. So a community's poverty level, a water system isn't going to have the ability to influence the economy of the entire community. So those are the types of indicators where it'd be really difficult for a system, to influence things. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Okay, I'm rechecking the Q&A box, and we do have a submission. It does indicate on page 12, the white paper shows that a no inclusion in risk assessment 2.0 for a risk indicator in step 3 will result from the step 1 resulting being, give me 1 second, let me make sure I'm capturing this correctly. In step 3 will result from the step 1 result being fair or poor. And from step 2, results being fair or poor for all 3 criteria. However, there is no other possible outcome indicated in step 3 other than no for a risk indicator when the step 1 result is fair or poor. Is it therefore relevant what the step 2 results are when the step 1 results are fair or poor? Furthermore, tables in Appendix C show potential risk indicators that are judged no inclusion in risk assessment 2.0, whether step 1 was fair or poor, but step 2 was good for all the criteria. Those potential risk indicators include non-compliance with primary drinking water standards, frequency of water quality near MCL, and current water quality greater than 50% for acute contaminants. Do the results for the indicator indicate that the result in step 2 were irrelevant? Quite
Yes,
lengthy.
and I think, luckily I was able to follow all that. I was getting nervous at the beginning, but I definitely understand the question. And for everyone else, maybe I can help put this into context. We had the question is, we had a number of risk indicators that scored fair or poor for applicability, which is the first step. And then step 2, which is looking at data fitness, you could have actually good data fitness. We have good data quality there, but you would still get a no for consideration for risk assessment 2.0. And so the question was, was that being applied the correct way? And the answer is yes. And I think we should have, and it's something to look at in our write-up, indicated that, if the water sector, if everyone is agreeing that this really isn't a good indicator for whatever reason, and you can see all of the write-ups in the appendices that explain the reasons, then even if there's good data, it still should not be considered because applicability was not scoring well. We didn't want to consider them, although we were thorough in doing our due diligence and looking at the data fitness for those indicators in case at some point in the future people change their mind and applicability needs to change its score. So I encourage everybody, if you disagree with an applicability score that's been assigned, to let us know. We definitely would be happy to revisit the evaluations and take a look at on how we've applied the criteria. But we were pretty stringent, in how we were looking at those indicators that scored fair or poor for applicability to help us narrow things down. It definitely, we wanted to not include those or consider them if they weren't scoring at least a good for applicability. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If I did not answer the commenter's question, please send us an email or and maybe we can hop on a call to discuss.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. That was a great, great answer. Currently, I'm not seeing any hands up and no related submissions to this particular question if you'd like to proceed.
Okay. Again, good comments, good questions. Really appreciate your engagement with us on this. The next few steps are really more logistics, but I'm happy to go over them with you all. Wanted to give you, again, another visualization of our timeline. We're going to be working on setting our thresholds and determining our scoring and weighting approach at the same time. We've already started looking at different approaches since we've finished this white paper. Our goal is to have everything done for recommendations by our December 14th webinar workshop. So definitely save the date. It will be the same time, 9 to 11 a.m. And we would definitely encourage your participation and your feedback on the next phase of our methodology development. And our goal, again, is to finish the methodology development by the end of the year so that we can begin conducting the official risk assessment for the 2021-22 fund expenditure plan, which is where we would have that list of systems that are considered at risk, to answer the question that was previously asked. These are the dates for our upcoming webinars and events that are associated with the needs assessment. If you remember that infographic that I showed at the very beginning of the page presentation, we have our cost assessment and our affordability assessment. We are working on those, and we have webinars to kind of talk about what we're doing. And I like to end by just stressing that Risk Assessment 2.0, which is what we're developing for the next fund expenditure plan, is not going to be the final risk assessment that the SAFER program uses for the next 10 years. This methodology is going to be refined and improved over time. We're going to be collecting better data. We're going to have better data quality. We're going to be conducting studies to support our indicators and our thresholds. We're going to be learning from how the SAFER program is being implemented, looking at our systems that are failing now, the ones that are at risk, learn from what our engagement units are uncovering in their work with systems to help us continuously refine our risk assessment. And of course, refinement is not going to happen in a vacuum or in a silo. We are going to be working with the public, with stakeholders, to continuously improve our methodology. So please continue to stay engaged with us. I think if everyone looks at that list of 129 potential risk indicators that we evaluated, I'm sure there are some on there that I look at it too and I go, oh man, it'd be so great if we could use that one. I think that one is a very great indicator, but we just don't have the data for it. So I'm looking forward to the next iterations of our assessment where we can include some of these other indicators. So again, I want to open things up for broader Q&A. I'm sure some of you have some thoughts on our list of recommended indicators or our approach. Please raise your hand or submit a question.
Yeah, so we do have an open Q&A. And we would like to ask, do you have any questions or comments about the development of the risk assessment methodology? Again, if you are watching on the calipa.ca.gov, the bit.ly, which leads you to the form, will remain open until the end of public comment, which is the 30th. You can also submit a comment or ask a question at the safer@waterboards.ca.gov email box. We do have a staff that's monitoring the box and providing us those questions or comments. We do have the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen for those attending today. And I have seen that it's been used, so continue to do so, please. And then again, you can raise your hand, which is done by going to the bottom of your participant view and selecting the virtual hand, or if you're on the phone, press *9, you will be called upon, and then we will ask you to unmute yourself. So one moment while I check to see if there are any messages.
And I believe there was a question earlier, which we tabled till the end around OEHA.
Yes, that is still in there. So what it indicates is, where does OEHA fit into the organization of SAFER presented in the beginning of the workshop?
Great question. So first, we were asked to, and we were happy to look at all of the indicators that OEHA was utilizing in their human right to water tool. So I did have a slide on that. I can't remember how many indicators that we looked at, but you can see the assessment of all of those indicators in our appendices and in the white paper. We are working with OEHA right now to develop a framing for our collaborative effort moving forward and their contract with us. We have a contract with OEHA on this work. And I just also wanted to point out, I didn't get a chance to really mention this earlier, but we did, after our last webinar, we did reach out and start a monthly cross-agency work group with OEHA, DWR, Sigma folks, both within the water board and within DWR, and then other folks within DWR, to talk about our needs assessment work, to coordinate on SAFER. We are, I forgot to include, we're working with Region 5's CD SALTS group and CPUC's Affordability group. So we are trying to do a cross-agency collaborative effort, if you will, to stay coordinated on our SAFER work. And OEHA is part of that team. So OEHA is definitely involved. So I appreciate the conversation around it. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you so much. I don't see any further questions in the Q&A. However, we do have a question being submitted through the SAFER email box. It comes from Eric Furtado, Production Superintendent by Celia California Water Service. And it does read as follows. My suggestion to help to define the term failing would be to include failure to complete regulatory requirements, such as, but not limited to, completion of annual regulatory reporting, such as CCRs or EARS. Are these documents completed accurately and correctly? Could a system with no rate structure be flagged as an at-risk system, for example? Records of proper notification to DDW for water quality violations, low, no pressure events, treatment plant upset failure, or any other operational events that must be reported to customers and DDW. These items are very much in the technical and managerial realms of water system operations. I suspect that some data gaps are as direct results of lack of required reporting and communication from operators and or system managers to DDW. Could some efforts be put towards assisting systems with completing EARS to help to fill in data gaps? And that was received through our SAFER inbox.
Yes, no, a fantastic comment, Eric. Really appreciate your feedback. I think a number of the recommendations that you made there, some of them would be captured in treatment technique violations, other in monitoring and reporting violations. But I agree with you. There are some data points that we are not currently capturing. We are making improvements to the electronic annual report. The report is being moved. The survey is being moved to a new platform. It will have additional functionality, which should improve the user experience and hopefully make it easier for folks to complete. That being said, we do have contracts in place with technical assistance providers to help support systems in completing the EAR. And we really want to help connect systems that are struggling to those technical assistance providers. And so again, we're trying to find ways to help make that connection. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I do believe we have in the new EAR an option for systems to say that they need help, which will better help us connect those systems. So again, I really appreciate the feedback that was provided. I think I'd want to sit down and read it maybe 2 or 3 more times to make sure that I was digesting everything that was in that email. And Eric, if you have any additional suggestions, please reach out because we would love to hear them. But all good comments. Thank you.
Yes, and as Kristen just stated, we do have access to all of the submissions and can always revisit them, so that's great. I just wanted to give you an update, Kristen. There is no submission currently coming in through forms. However, there is another safer or submission through the chat. What are you doing? What are you going to do about critical indicators that are simply not available? Greg Pierce's work shows that there is no good annual data on financial reporting for water systems. Different water systems report to different agencies and use different formats. Does this indicator of financial health simply does this indicator of financial health simply not used? Instead, how would this financial data be obtained?
Fantastic question. I really appreciate it. And we have been, the State Water Board and my unit with ORPP has been working with our EAR, Electronic Annual Report Input Forum. We have been working to make recommendations to add some additional EAR questions around financial stability of water systems. And so we've recommended adding a section that asks about revenues and another that asks about expenses. And so we are going to be collecting additional financial information about water systems in the electronic annual report, which we should hopefully be able to incorporate into our risk assessment in the future. So we are taking some steps. We do recognize that water systems do report some of this financial data to other agencies, and we are trying to identify if we can get our access to that data in a machine readable format. And that's been the real difficult thing for us. A lot of this information is submitted in PDF documents and things that we can't create a data set out of. It would be very time intensive for our staff to do data mining for an individual data point. So again, something that we are definitely looking into and are prioritizing, because we've heard this feedback from a lot of different stakeholders. So it's something we definitely would like to incorporate in the future.
Thank you, Kristen. So I've just double checked with our supports, and currently they are refreshing. So one moment while they upload the additional suggestions or comments. It is now here. I will read it. It goes as follows. This is from Jonathan Rash, and it was news to me that tribal water systems would be scored for risk differently than other water systems. How will a separate scoring system compare? How will tribes compete for resources on level ground despite being scored differently? Or is there a consideration of a tribal set aside on the table to handle this potential inequity? I am encouraged that the disparities in data availability will not be held against tribes, and I am hopeful that tribes will be evaluated on equal footing and have equal access to resources. Thank you and take care.
I mean, great comment. Honestly, we really appreciate that feedback. I think, the approach, the methodology for determining at-risk systems is going to be different and is different. Currently, we have our different methodologies for state small systems, domestic wells, and then public water systems. While the methodology may be different, the at-risk determination puts you on the same playing field, if you will, the same level of priority for funding and technical assistance within the safer funding umbrella, if you will. So there's that. I mean, we would, and I'm getting a text from Michelle Frederick, who is the manager of the DDW Safer section. Michelle, do you want to come on and say something?
Sure. Can you hear me, Kristen?
I can, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Jonathan. I just wanted to reach out to about the tribal aspect in terms of how we're looking at it for our cost analysis. Because as we're developing we're working with our Office of Public Participation to develop the tribal considerations for risk and working with EPA on sort of the water systems that may be in violation, we're also looking at the cost estimate and what we anticipate doing, and we'd love feedback from you, is if we are not able to pull all of this together before the end of the year, one of the things that we may do is, you know, estimate sort of the percentage of water systems that we're seeing at risk in the public water sector, or I should say in the water sector regulated by the state, and do sort of an analysis that parallels that on the cost side and say, you know, we anticipate X number of water systems may be at violation or at risk, so that we are creating, as we're sending out a cost estimate, we are sort of creating a comparable tribal cost estimate so that that is incorporated into what we're doing. So I hope that helps. You know, we are still working on how that all, since it's a different system, how it would be applicable, but we are not. Um, we are certainly taking that into consideration in all across all of the issues.
Thanks, Michelle.
And Kristen, great response. I am receiving a report that there are no further questions or comments. Is there anything that you'd like to further elaborate or explain that you haven't had a chance to do so, Kristen?
Ooh, big question. I think I've covered it. I want to see, I think I have, we do have this SAFER program timeline, Did you want to highlight that?
Yeah, so we do have a couple of upcoming events. On your screen, you should be able to see the SAFER program timeline. It does indicate that in October of 2020, the 8th through the 14th, ensuring equitable engagement in water management. We then have the 13th, which is today's event, risk assessment webinar. On the 30th, we have the UNC pilot financial dashboard presentation. And then we have the release of the administrator FAQ. Then in November, we have on the 20th, the cost assessment webinar. On the 30th, we do have the SAFER advisory group member selection and the release administrator RFP, followed by the administrator public meetings. In December, which I can't believe we're almost there, the 10th, we have the advisory group meeting. On the 14th, a risk assessment webinar threshold and scoring, followed by the administrator public meetings. And then in early 2021, we have the POE pilot workshop, administrator consolidation public meetings. So we have quite a bit of events that we encourage everyone on this call to continue to attend and participate in. Okay, great. And give me one moment. Okay, so Kristen, I'm not sure, since I'm not seeing that there are any further submissions or questions. Do you want to go ahead and close up today's event? I see that we're a few minutes early, but I'm not seeing any further submissions.
Yeah, I am happy to give people time back on their calendar today. So very much appreciate everyone taking some time this morning to walk through an update on where we are with the risk assessment and providing some early impressions and feedback. It was really beneficial and helpful, so thank you. I do want to encourage you again, I know I'm a broken record, but I really want to encourage you again to please take a look at our white paper and to submit any public comments or feedback to us. You can use the Google Forms, the forms that we've been pointing to that you can reach using that bit.ly web address, or you can shoot us an email at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We would love to hear from you as we continue to develop our methodology.
Yes, thank you. And if you find yourself having issues accessing any of the materials or reference documents that Kristen is speaking of, just route an email to the safer@waterboards.ca.gov, and we will be happy to route you any links that you need or any materials that you might have difficulty locating, because we do encourage ongoing feedback. And as Kristen mentioned earlier, The Microsoft form will remain open until the end of the month, October 30th. So if you didn't have a chance to participate today in the polls or discussions, or if you have any further suggestions or comments, that form will remain open. All right, and as the slide indicates, there is the email address. Again, any questions, concerns, comments, or if you need assistance locating anything, please use this email address. Again, it is safer@waterboards.ca.gov. And I want to thank you, Kristen, for your presentation and for the team behind the scenes. It was a great event with minimal bumps. And thank you to the attendees that took time out of their day to join us today. And thank you for your suggestions, your comments, and your contributions in general. And with that, I would say that our event has now closed. You get about 20 minutes back into your day.